Welcome, viewer, wayfarers of the past and searchers of untold stories, to history. Chances are you have no clue about what old Egypt was truly similar to, so it could shock you to discover that day-to-day existence in the hour of the pharaohs was current in a ton of ways. Today, we're investigating what regular day-to-day existence resembled for old Egyptians. Training and medication were surprisingly refined, and people partook in a fairness under the law that wouldn't be seen in that frame of mind for quite a long time into the future. As well as being the essential wellspring of water for crop water system and close making, the Nile stream was fundamentally the highway in antiquated Egypt. Both the lower and privileged alike gone along it in straightforward rowboats and wooden boats to get from one spot to another, but instead than watching out for their speed and watcher state officers, the Egyptians needed to continually be wary of hippo and crocodile assaults. The pharaoh bullies was killed by a hippo while going on the Nile, and has been proposed that a hippo might have named Ruler Tut in a comparative assault, prompting his sudden passing. Brew making was first recorded quite a while back in Old Egypt. Similar to my uncle Gilbert, Egyptians love lager. Brew was viewed as a staple feast, which is the reason the two kids and grown-ups drank it, and wages were paid in merciless grain that expressed. Brew in Old Egypt wasn't similar to the stuff you request by the glass, the neighborhood bar. It was more similar to a thick, sweet soup with a lower liquor content, so you could have a bowl or two for supper without getting into a tanked fistfight with a hippo. In spite of what you might have expected, old Egyptians rehearsed various high-level clinical fields including dentistry, gynecology, medical procedure, and even post-mortem, albeit perhaps that last one isn't excessively as business as usual for anybody. Medical care was obviously accessible to everybody, including slaves, and cleanliness was nothing to joke about in antiquated Egypt. Furthermore, it was typical for all kinds of people to totally shave off the entirety of their body hair, even the hair on their heads. In spite of the obvious physical information the old Egyptians had, they hadn't sorted out everything about the human body. They accept that the psyche was situated in the heart, or IP, and that all considerations started from the heart was likewise remembered to be the seat of extreme feelings like love, misery, and valiance, a conviction shared by pretty much every culture. With respect to the mind, the antiquated Egyptians plainly didn't appreciate it, since it was basically tossed in the garbage during the alteration cycle. The legal framework in antiquated Egypt was divided between two courts. The can wager and the extraordinary can put everything on the line. Can wager essentially managed offenses, while the incredible can wager was saved for serious wrongdoings like burglary and murder. Commonly, the pharaoh's vizier managed over each case with extreme judgment coming from the pharaoh himself. Be that as it may, in particularly convoluted cases, the courts would concede to the wills of the prophets, or since the prophets never tried to appear, the sculptures of the prophets. As we referenced before, gynecology was a clinical field present in Old Egypt, yet similar as the heart and cerebrum banter, the old Egyptians hadn't exactly figured out every one of the issues yet. So to test whether a lady was prolific, a clove of garlic was embedded into a lady who, and in the event that the garlic could be smelled on her breath, it implied she had the option to bear youngsters. In the event that the garlic couldn't be smelled, that implied there was some sort of blockage or impediment and children were good and gone. Prepackaged games were a famous distraction in Old Egypt, and effectively the most well-known one was a game called Senet, was played on a length-themed chess-style board with every player throwing dice or tossing sticks to move the ball. Senet was well known to such an extent that works of art and Nefertari playing the game had been found on old sanctuary walls. Be that as it may, in Old Egypt, it was viewed as to a greater extent a transitional experience into masculinity, and as such it wasn't performed until some other time. There are sanctuary artistic creations portraying clerics carrying out the methodology on young men in their mid to late teenagers. On the off chance that you were puzzling over whether bad dreams existed in Old Egypt, history is muddled about the social meaning of circumcision in antiquated Egypt. Cosmetics was pervasive in Old Egypt, Men wouldn't hesitate to dunk into the mid-2000s. Pete Wentz classified were some really astounding guyliner. The eye cosmetics was produced using crushing lead metals into a substance called coal to deliver what was basically lead paint. Sanctuaries in Old Egypt were valid public venues in that they acted both as spots of love and as safes for the country's riches. Money didn't show up in Egypt until some other time, which implied grain was the cash everybody utilized. Executives at every sanctuary would give out grain likewise to pay everybody's wages, with a low pay work bringing back around 10 portions of bread and 2 containers of brew. Regardless of living close to perhaps of the mightiest waterway on the planet, individuals in Old Egypt didn't eat a lot of fish. The old Egyptian eating routine comprised generally of wheat and grain, which checks out when most of your populace is paid in bread and lager, foods grown from the ground. On the off chance that you've at any point lived near the equator or watched Miami Vice during the 80s, you knew all about the allure of material apparel. Cloth is explicitly really great for sweltering climate since it's a slim, breathable texture that feels cool to the touch, and the old Egyptians made a lot of it. Material was made by picking flax plants from the banks of the Nile and turning them into strings that can be then woven into fabric. As well as just being a common-sense piece of clothing for the desert environment, the texture was likewise an image of status. In antiquated Egypt, the two genders seemed, by all accounts, to be equivalent. All things considered, ladies could trade property, including the 2 slaves and land, and were additionally ready to record claims and request for separate. Furthermore, the Egyptians didn't rehearse female child murder, which demonstrates child young ladies were similarly basically as esteemed as child young men. This seems like, without a doubt, the absolute minimum of orientation fairness, until you consider that the training was normal in different social orders simultaneously. Understudies concentrated on various subjects that pretty much looked like a cutting-edge educational program, including perusing and composing, math, history, science, and medication. The richest children, for example, the Pharaoh children and the children of respectability, went to the sovereign school, yet grants existed that permitted specific excellent lower-class understudies to join in. Old Egypt was shockingly present day in more ways than one, permitting its residents to lead lives not absolutely unrecognizable from the ones we lead today. Might you want to live or walk like an Egyptian? As we arrive at the last edges of the present video, we need to stretch out our genuine thanks to all of you for going along with us on this experience. Your time and consideration are really valued. In the event that you delighted in what you saw, remember to show some adoration by loving, remarking, and buying in. We're hugely appreciative for your help. Until our next rendezvous, continue to investigate, remain inquisitive, and above all, thank you for watching.